Hey folks, this is Jesse Coe, back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well, wherever y'all are, and whatever part of the day you're in. I sure do appreciate y'all joining me, giving me a little bit of your time. Hope it gets you through getting ready in the morning, or conference periods, or lunch, or driving to or from work, or shuttling kids around. Helps you a little bit, helps our country a little bit. Lord, thank you for the time to sit here and record this podcast today. Watch over those that listen and those that have shared it so often. Guide them through their days. Give them peace. And give me the words that you want me to speak. We have one dog who is lapping up water out of I don't know what. One more dog. Two puppy dogs. Yes. So, I know I had something else to mention, and I have no idea anymore. I will say this. I think I mentioned this recently, but dogs have to make you smile. If we were as excited about life as dogs are about everything, I think our world and our marriages and families and kids and everything else would look quite a bit different. Maybe if we were a little bit more concerned about those things than all the stuff we chase after. I'm going to try and do this, folks. I will tell you that I have already recorded this once and it was atrocious. And so we're going to come back and try this again because the topic is so large. And truth be told, I'm so ignorant on it. And that's kind of part of the problem. So I'm gonna give you the best that I can feel like I can do on this issue. So we talked about juries a little bit in the previous podcast, and today we're going to talk about the original intent of the Constitution versus the idea that has really come into prevalence over the last 150 years or so, which is the living Constitution. And I say 150 years because it all kind of goes back to Darwinian evolution, even here in the United States. But it really hasn't kicked into high gear, I feel like, until the last 80 years. And even then, it kind of was delayed for a while, but that's really where it hit, I feel like. So, a couple things. A lot of this, again, most of this is coming from the Founders Bible, but you can find it in a number of places. A little bit, I'm going to read some of their comments, and I'll tell you that. So, this actually from them, if you don't realize this, students used to be tested on the Constitution, used to have an annual written test, and a lot of the student texts included the Constitution and catechisms on it to help the students remember all the different parts. And the Constitution, folks, was written to be understood by the everyday citizen. It wasn't written in such a way that only the super bright lawyers or judges or whoever could read it. It was made specifically to be understood by the people. And so we've got a couple problems here. Now it's become so convoluted, law has, that you have to have a degree just to work your way through it, right? And secondly, we don't study the Constitution anymore. We've dropped the ball as a people. We don't pay attention. And one of the ways in this Founders Bible, they gave a comment that the First Amendment was only known, really, the 5 parts of the First Amendment, by 1 out of every 1,000 citizens. So there's 5 basic guarantees. I give you a second. You think about the First Amendment. Think if you can name all 5 parts. So you've got freedom of religion, press, speech, assembly, and petition. I would be willing to bet, myself included, that most of us fall into the 999 that don't know that. And that kind of happens on this podcast every day, folks. Again, myself included. Almost every day, we cover something that I can almost guarantee you 99.99% of the American public has no clue about, including our students that are in publicly funded education that ought to be learning these things as a primary, secondary only to the Bible, as our founders pointed out multiple times. But we don't know them because we've gotten lazy, because we're more concerned with all the other things. I guess that maybe the dog comment was kind of fortuitous, or whatever you want to call it, prescient, maybe, I don't know. But we have gotten our priorities so out of whack, and we're starting to pay the price for it, folks. We're paying the price in our marriages, we're paying it in our families, our communities, our schools. You know, you if you really want to get a glimpse of what's going on in the country, go to any school and walk the halls for 2 weeks. And if they won't let you do that, talk to an administrator or a counselor or a teacher that you trust. We are doing almost everything wrong in public school today. The goal is certainly not to produce productive citizens or actually educate children in a way that will be beneficial to their life, the vast majority of them. And that's a whole nother topic, so I'm not going to get off track. That was one of the problems earlier. So President Jefferson, comment to Supreme Court Justice William Johnson. On every question of construction, carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted, recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one which was passed. So obviously, if you know anything about history, if you've listened to this podcast even for just a few months, you know the original intent of the First Amendment. It's very clear. You look at it, freedom of religion. They were not trying to lower Christianity to the level of the imposters, which is what the New York Supreme Court Chief Justice, right, James Kent, said, imposters, calling the other religions that. They were trying to make sure that one denomination wasn't favored over another. And that's really obvious if you look at the founders, their generation, and the commentary there. But what we've done is we've twisted it, among others, many others, right, to mean something it doesn't even mean anymore. And so with the Constitution, we've read all this stuff into the Constitution that isn't there. We've twisted it to mean what it doesn't. And we have ignored the very simple concepts that our founders put in there. I'm going to get this wrong, but it's something like the principle of parsimony or something. I can't remember, can almost see it in my head right now, but it means the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. And we've gone so far from that, folks. So far. And Jefferson, who's supposed to be the one that approves of all this stuff that's been done over the last 80 years by the left, he's saying, go back to the original intent. And so in the Marine Corps, I wanted to read this real quick. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead there. We had something called commander's intent. And what it really boiled down to, I'll read it first. This is the definition. The commander's personal expression on the purpose of the operation. It must be clear, concise, and easily understood. It may also include how a commander envisions achieving a decision as well as the conditions that, when satisfied, accomplish the purpose. So in the Marine Corps, one thing I think the Marine Corps did really well was push leadership out to small unit leaders. And part of that was, hey, this is what I want you to do, Corporal, but you're going to be out there on your own operating, or Sergeant, right? And if things don't go exactly the way I think they're going to, which they never do, I want you to use your brain. This is what I want the end state to be like. I want you and your Marines on that hill and no enemy there. This is how I would like you to accomplish it. But at the end of the day, I just want you to accomplish it. And so we had to know that as officers, we had to give that to our Marines, commander's intent. so that those Marines, when they got out there and there were questions that arose that we didn't have the answer to, just like when our founders made the Constitution, they knew there would be questions that would arise that they weren't God, and they knew that, unlike us today. And so they built in the best they could. They built this Constitution. And so what Jefferson said earlier and what some others are saying later on, if we get to those quotes, is look back at the original intent. For example, 95, 8%, I don't even remember what of the population was Christian at the founding of the country. So to look today and say, hey, we can keep this country just the way, all this greatness, but we're going to kick out God and Jesus Christ, that's just ludicrous. I mean, the analogy, and it's probably a horrible one, folks, but the one that pops in my head, that would be like these Marines saying, well, we're going to go take this hill, but we're going to throw all our weapons away. It's just, it's mind boggling. So, and we used to hold to this, folks. We used to hold to this original intent mentality, right? For majority of our history. And then we get Darwin. And we start to get some of these people like Harvard Law School Dean Christopher Columbus Langdell, which it's ironic, right? Columbus, the left probably wouldn't even like him today. But he came and started pushing this. He wanted to take evolution to jurisprudence, to the judicial system, right? And so part of that was, well, as society changes, the law needs to change. The Constitution needs to change. It needs to evolve with the society, right? No more unchanging standards. Well, this is from the Founders Bible. These are the 5 things that really characterize this philosophy. There is no objective God-given standard of law, or if there are, they're irrelevant to the modern legal system. Since God is not the author of law, the author of law must be man. In other words, the law is law simply because the highest human authority, the state, has said it is law and is able to back it up by force. Since man and society evolve, therefore law must evolve as well. Judges, through their decisions, guide the evolution of the law. To study law, get at the original sources of law, the decisions of the judges. So again and again, now we go back to these elite judges that are not elected, right? They're put on there, and now they get to control, which is how you end up with Roe v. Wade, where even though the Declaration says all American citizens have a right to life, really all mankind, we're going to go ahead and slaughter these babies. They don't get the right to life. And we go along with it. Before that, what led to it is, no, God has no place in America, even though multiple of our great leaders, many, and the founders and the whole society, with very few exceptions, this is a Christian nation. Original Chief Justice John Day, Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, Supreme Court or New York Supreme Court Chief Justice James Kent, and the list just goes on and on and on, folks. This is a Christian nation. Well, today, those judges said, nope, it's not. And we decided it, so everybody has to go along with it, right? And so that's what we've ended up with this evolution. And so it got pushed into these schools. How did we get these judges? They got pushed into these schools, right? Starting again, probably there were others, but Christopher Langdell, Harvard Law School. And once these students, and then it started to spread out across the country. And once these students became Supreme Court justices, they turned the court, right, into something that was like the military's been done, what's happened to the military, a social experiment rather than worried about justice. Like we talked about in the previous podcast, the juries, the court of justice became the court of law, became just a court now. And it depends on the political whims of men, and that's what we're going to adjust to. And so this Constitution, these people, became, and this is just a few examples, Justice Louis Brandeis, if we would be guided by the light of reason, we must let our minds be bold, meaning we got to ignore what came before, and we're going to do whatever we want to do. Justice Benjamin Cardoza, if there is any law which is back of the sovereignty of the state and superior thereto, it is not law in such a sense as to concern the judge or lawyer. So, meaning if there anything that comes before the state or before the judges, right? No, just the state. That's what he said. And it's superior. We don't have to pay attention to that. So what he's really, translation there, folks, we don't have to pay attention to God because God's superior to the state. Our founders almost exclusively acknowledge that. And then his law supersedes man's law. And this justice is saying, nope, just throw it all out. If that's even true, then we don't have to ignore it. Uh, he also said, I take judge-made law as one of the existing realities of life. See, and judges we didn't create the judicial branch to make laws. That's the legislative branch to make laws. That's their job. But now we have judges that make laws. And you can see that in the Supreme Court decisions and how important those Supreme Court placements have become. And so, let's see. Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes, we are under a constitution, but the constitution is what the judges say it is. So this is how we got to this opinion, right? We got to this living constitution, and here we are. Y'all hear the coyotes in the background? So this evolution thing is so widespread and it's so devious. And one of the worst places we see it is schools. And there's a section here that I'm going to go back and talk to. I think we're probably going to do an entire podcast on this. So I'm just briefly going to talk about the fact that if laws change, if the Constitution is changing, then the people said, well, then education ought to change as well. And the old methods, they're not any good, even though they were good. And they're not working, even though they were working. And so we're going to try new math and new English. And we did, and it's horrible. And you can see it in schools today. And now the game is just testing and grades. And it's like, I wish I could remember the analogy right now, but it's basically like people on the Titanic and everybody's scrambling to climb over the person in front of them. It doesn't matter whether you actually save the ship just so long as you're not the last one on it and there's other people lower than you, right? I guess it's kind of like I've heard this recently. Maybe this will fit with some of y'all. You know, if you and your friends are out in the woods camping and this grizzly bear comes and starts to attack you, right? The joke is you don't have to be the fastest person, you just can't be the slowest one, right? Because the grizzly bear is going to get the slowest one. And then when they do, then you're safe, at least for a little while. And so that's kind of what we've done with education. We have this relativistic attitude now. Well, as long as we can make ourselves look better compared to X, Y, and Z, even if we don't really look better, right? And so that's the evolution again. And the evolution brings all the LGBTQ stuff in, right? Because God's standard is this, a man and a woman in marriage, but we're going to ignore God and we're going to evolve and we're going to change. And so now we're going to change what marriage is. Oh, for those of y'all that are Patreon, this just popped in my head, that have signed up for Patreon, we're going to do a video cast. I don't know if it's going to be this week and maybe next week, but we're going to do one on the high school story coming out of North Carolina. If you know it, you know about it already. And if you don't, we're going to get into it. It won't take long, I promise. Anyway, education. So, see, this podcast is going so fast and I don't have enough time. What I want to read, I just want to read a couple comments. One's from Samuel Adams. The people alone have an inconstable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to institute government and to reform, alter, or totally change the same when their protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness require it. And the federal Constitution, according to the mode prescribed therein, Article 5, has already undergone such amendments in several parts of its form as experience has been judged necessary. So we, the people, have the right to change the Constitution when we see that it needs to be changed. But the idea of judges pushing a living constitution that changes based on their whims, right, their agenda, that's not how it works at all. I mean, it is how it works, sadly, but it's not how it's supposed to work. George Washington, in his farewell address, if, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional power be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates, but let there be no change by usurpation, for this is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. And we are destroying our free government. We're destroying our republic. We have been for decades. And we're starting to really see it now. You're seeing the result. The chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak. Founding Father John Jay, original Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Every member of the state ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country. By knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they are violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. So we had quite a bit more, folks, but I'm already over, and I apologize. The point is, the Constitution is not a living document. The Constitution had an intent, original intent by our founders, just like the Marine Corps had a commander's intent. We've violated that multiple times. By far, probably the biggest ones are, well, not probably, by far the biggest ones are separation of church and state in 47 and Roe v. Wade. If you can't understand that we've violated life via abortion, which is the very first inalienable right listed in the Declaration of Independence, and that this is a Christian nation, as our very first Supreme Court Chief Justice and multiple other presidents and leaders have acknowledged, and Supreme Court justices. It's because we don't know history, or so it's either gross ignorance, which it has been on my part, or it's malevolence, meaning we know that that's true, but we're going to go ahead and ignore it and do what we want anyway. And so we're going to get into this. I just started to do some prep work for a podcast on Lincoln down the road. And it's just so clear, folks. You can't have those two people coexist. One or the other is going to give. One or the other is going to give. And it's going to go back to Washington's farewell address. Free governments are destroyed. If the left, the living constitutionalists, the evolutionists, that party, and I don't mean a political party, I just mean that group of people, citizens, if we keep going down their road, America's gone. It's lost. The only chance is to turn back to God. And on that note, I will leave y'all alone. I appreciate y'all sticking with me. God bless y'all. God bless your families. God bless America. Thanks for walking around and listening to the coyotes and the crickets and everything else. We'll talk to y'all again real soon. Looking forward to it, folks.